in our lives to really because there's much more to life than just the tasks that we need to accomplish or the things that we're supposed to do and perform and life is about much more than that. It's about things like joy, which C.S. Lewis said is the serious business of heaven, and it's about things like peace, and life is also about even rest. And I remember just last week, this first message called Breathing Room last week, and I got home after the service. And remember, last week was 5 soccer games with one of my daughters and 2 dance recitals with the other one, and a softball game that I'm the coach that hadn't been to a practice yet. And but I was going to be there that evening to coach and play in the game. But after our services got home at lunchtime, my mother and father-in-law was there to watch some of our kids that weren't going to the other events and things. And my father-in-law asked me, "What was your message on? What was it about?" And he said, "What top couple points?" And so I started sharing a couple points about margin and breathing room, and I heard my wife in the other room, other part of the house, say, "Are you kidding me?" And I went and kind of told her, "No, I'm not kidding. I'm preaching to myself. I'm preaching to probably all of us that sometimes just get our schedules just beyond the point of margin, beyond the point of what's really healthy. And sometimes it comes at us, but if it becomes a habit, if it becomes just part of our lives, it's not just a season, it's ongoing. It becomes part of us, and it can have some dramatic effects on our life. And to be a follower of Christ, in order to flourish, in order to really grow in the Lord, our souls need rest. We'll need some margin or breathing room in our lives. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we talked about last week how both the New Testament and Old Testament, how our schedule, our finances, ultimately our relationships all do better when they have breathing room. And then the God we serve in the New Testament, Jesus said things like, "Come to me, all who are heavy laden, heavy burdened, I will give you rest." In the Old Testament, Psalms 46:10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And so there's a stillness that's required. There's the knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, the knowledge of God that goes beyond just what we see in the here and now. And that really brings us to the definition of breathing room. And here was the definition: the space between our current pace and our limits. Last week we talked about each one of us, no matter how efficient we are, how articulate, how much we're able to get things done in a day, we all are limited. We all have limits. We are finite beings. While God is infinite, you and I are finite. And many of us, as industrious as we are and efficient and great on a computer, and we can do a million things in a day, and we wish we had even more minutes in our day to get more things done, that we have limits. And that is the space between our current pace and our limits is our breathing room. It might be different for each one of us, but it's there for us. And so this we're going to talk about this idea of breathing room or margin in the area of time. This thing we call time. And what do we know about time? Well, one, we know it's precious. We know it's worthwhile. We know it's a commodity that is very valuable. There was a 19th century naturalist and Harvard professor who was once approached about speaking amongst all the professors at this learned society, invited to address its members, and it was a big hoopla thing, and he was invited to lecture at this kind, but he said, "I can't do that." And they said, "Well, you'll be paid handsomely to come and be a part of this." And he responded with, "That's no inducement to me. I can't afford to waste my time making money." And so in this regard, he had this good clue into that time is the other hot commodity, even at the same level or more so than money. And I think you, and especially as the years pass, as you get a little older, you would agree with that maybe statement more and more. As you watch the commodity of time go faster and faster, you realize that you'll never have your 20s over again. You never have your 30s again. Maybe you have your 40s for an extra year, because I heard 39 again from many people. But maybe you have this extra time, and then your 50s are here, and time just goes by fast. And so he says, "I can't afford to waste my time just making money." We often take time for granted, don't we? I think when we're young, you probably do that more often. And I don't know if you've been taught this also just by learning. I learned in a hurry never to tell my parents that I was bored. So every time I told them I was bored, I had this instant list of chores. It's a laundry list of chores in order to do. And so I never would tell them I was bored after I learned that lesson very, very quickly. And now we pass that lesson on to my own kids. But there's Susan Ertz who said this: millions long for immortality, this fountain of youth idea. Millions long for immortality who do not know what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Now, I don't know if that's probably as many of us as adults and things, but maybe there's times where you long for more days and live forever and things, but you don't know what you do with yourself today. Maybe some are like that with time. Maybe some often misuse time. I was reading this story in Sweden in 2011. There was this a killer on the loose. He'd killed a man, and in November 2011, he'd been on the run ever since when he finally went to turn himself into the Malmö police station. And he was told that they couldn't help him because the station was closed. He said on the intercom, "I'm a suspected of murder and a wanted man." And in the intercom, he said, "You guys really want to get a hold of me?" Hadri was eventually directed to another police station that took him into custody. And when asked why they turned the suspect away, the commander of the Malmö station mentioned their current building renovations and just said, "Things are a bit messy right now." So that maybe sometime our calling in life, we wrongly prioritize things. And I think that's an illustration, and that happens. We get priorities out of order. And even the job that we're given to do with our life here, we don't get done because we get distracted by other things. We say, well, we're closed on this because we thought this was more important, and we don't really function in our primary functionality, especially as a Christian being or a person that seeks God. The Bible has a lot to do and say in order for us to help us really understand time. This thing that we call time. The Bible says in Psalms 90, what we're going to address today, it's a prayer from Moses. It's the only psalm in the entire book of the Psalms written by Moses. As big of a person and that Moses was, a figure in the Old Testament, wrote the entire Pentateuch. This is the only psalm that he writes. It makes it into the book of Psalms. So it's kind of special in that way. We're going to learn that much of what Moses is, in incredible ways, how he understood about time and how he was so capable and adequate to speak on this, because Moses actually lived almost 4 different lives. If anyone could speak on time, I think it would be Moses, because parts of his lives were so different, they would feel like a whole different lifetime. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, Moses, you understand, when he was first put in a little reed basket, delivered by his mom, because they were going to kill the first of every Hebrew children. And so they put him in a reed basket, as mom does, and knows that the princesses or the daughters of Pharaoh are bathing in this certain area. And they come out and see this basket, and she rescues Moses. And Moses is then raised in Pharaoh's own household. Moses then has an opportunity all through, it'd be all his teenage years, middle school years, high college years, all his young adult years. He's raised living the high life. This would be, in a day and age where today you'd be living with plasma TVs and hot tubs every places, and click of your fingers, and you'd have servants coming and helping you, and you'd be eating the best food of all of Egypt. And this is the high life that Moses is living. And then it changes. The second stage, I would say, in his life is when he kills a guy that is abusing a Hebrew slave. And he is ostracized. He's thrown out. He becomes a fugitive. He's an outcast, thrown out into the desert. And he becomes a shepherd. You think that's different? He's got his shepherd stick. He's watching the sheep, watching the herds. Sun comes up, sun goes down. Sun comes up, sun comes down. He's looking for wild animals and things, but he's basically walking with the sheep for a numbers of years. And then God intervenes in his life, and you've known that as the burning bush story. And he comes and God calls him and says, "I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt under the slavery. I've heard them. They've been in bondage. I want them to set free. You're going to be my mouthpiece. You're going to be my tool. I'm going to send you to Egypt, and you're going to tell Pharaoh, let my people go." And this is after hundreds and hundreds of years of slavery in which these people have lived sun up and sun down, making bricks on behalf of the Egyptian empire. And Moses, after complaining about it, saying you can't talk and all other things. You know the story. Gets in the very thick of things politically. Worldwide, planet-wise, Egypt is a big force to be reckoned with, and Moses is in the middle of that. And he's saying to Pharaoh, this powerful leader who's considered a god among the Egyptians, hey, you need to let these people go. And Pharaoh's like, who are you? This is all a part of Moses' life. And eventually, you know the story that Moses and the people are allowed to go. And the Red Sea is split up and the people go safely. The Egyptian army that pursues all perishes. And Moses begins what I would call the fourth part of his life, wandering in the desert the next 40 years with this obstinate, stubborn people that were promised this great land. They were promised where Israel is today, the promised land, all the way back to Abraham. But they sent spies into the promised land, and 10 of them came back and said, the people are too big. They're too big of a force. We can't go there. And others, a couple of spies, Caleb and Joshua, say, we can take these guys on. Let's go. This land's been given ours. But they don't go. In the next 40 years, Moses then is wandering with these people in the wilderness. And he says, and it's interesting, in one of the verses talk about Moses' eyes being good. He's got good eyes. Even at 120 years old, his eyes are good. It's a good thing because even Moses isn't able to go into the promised land. He's only able to see it from a distance. He's not allowed to go in after all his serving, after all of what he puts up with. And so this Psalms 90 is in the time of the book of Numbers. If you read your Bibles and you've read the book of Numbers, you know that Numbers is a glimpse of a tragic story that we're going to talk about. Is about a generation that never goes into the promised land, including Moses. And so we're going to look now of what was written about time. And from all Moses' experience and all of his understanding, he pours into this idea of time in Psalms 90, 1 through 12. So we're going to look at that. Let's read the first few verses here. 1 and 2, it says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And so this being the only psalm Moses writes, he writes in big swaths again. If he's got a paintbrush, these are big strokes. And one of the things he understands is he is well acquainted with the Hebrew people and their history, even with his stint with the Egyptians for a while. He is well acquainted with all the way back to Abraham. But because Moses writes the entire Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible are all written by Moses, he knows the story, and he knows that ever since the beginning, God has been the refuge of these people. He is their reason for any kind of hope that they've had. And before the mountains were born, he says, you brought forth the earth. Moses, a major leader in ancient times of Israel, knew who created the earth. There was no just debate going on and things about whether it was by evolution or how we came from monkeys and apes and things first. But he says, from everlasting to everlasting, you are. And this is in Hebrew meant from vanishing point to vanishing point. Moses knew that there was a beginner. And he knew there was going to be an end, and he would be the ender. And everything in between this is called time. But God stands outside of it. God is outside of time and space. So you and I, we operate in this idea of time, but God is outside of that. God is outside of it. From vanishing point to where there is nothing, to when there be nothing, God creates and sees everything all at one time. In our words. Now that's mind-boggling and mind-blowing to think about, but that is how big this God is. You can see that in verse 3 and 4. It says, you turn men back to dust, saying, return to dust, O sons of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You know, to you and I, for humanists or from a human perspective, we think, well, that sounds kind of harsh. Return to dust, O sons of men. You know, you picture in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, and you shall not pass. You know, and so this is God, and return to dust, O sons of men. And it sounds harsh, but this wouldn't have been harsh to Moses at all because he was a man that stood in the reality of God. Reality of Jehovah, or Yahweh, and he's reality of God's power. He knew that God is large and in charge. Reality that's different than ours, although he gives us some perspective, is a day of work from our perspective, may seem long, but God, even 1,000 years is really short. If you and I had 1,000-year lifespan, and we don't, but even if we did, that would barely be a bleep on the radar of God's existence, because God always was and always is. A watch in the night was normally back then about 3 hours. I'm saying our lives are maybe just like a watch in the night. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that's gone by, or like a watch in the night. Maybe 3 hours. There was an illustration I heard some years back that was funny about a man praying to the Lord. Said, Lord, if a day to us is like 1,000 years to you, then a penny must be like $1 million to you. So Lord, would you bless me with just a penny? And God said, in just a minute. Our perspective is so different. But Moses, he has this big perspective of God. In verse 5, Moses says, you sweep men away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. Though in the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withered. What's he saying there? You know, Moses is writing this book. He's in the midst of being in the wilderness, the time of the book of Numbers, which he tells really this tragic story of this entire generation who would die off before they even realized one of God's promises. God's promise was that this generation, these people would go to the promised land, and he promised after the spies came back with a bad report of Palestine that there was the giants in the land, and the spies said, you know, we can't go in there. God told them then, your whole generation will die without you seeing the promised land. You imagine the sadness of just knowing that was part of your destiny? Like, you're going to live day to day, you're going to live hour to hour, you're going to live month to month, and you've got family relationships and things if you're one of these Hebrew people, but the goal, the overall victory that you wanted to envision, that you wanted to be part of your life, is never going to happen. And Moses in this time, he's going to witness in this time of the wilderness over 1 million funerals. An entire generation is going to die. This is a tragic story. The book of Numbers is actually overall a tragic story. Before God will bring their kids in the promised land. So there's a sense of sadness there. But there's also a sense of the enormous power of God. God says something, and it is. No matter if we fight or complain or weep over it. And he says, you sweep men away in the sleep of death. Like new grass of the morning. Though in the morning it springs up, by evening it's dry and withered. What does it mean to spring up in the morning fresh and new? You know, some of you have held a newborn baby. They're just pink as, you know, first they're purple and then pink, you know, and then their skin is so soft. And you just want to touch their skin. It's just so soft, and you kind of poke at him and go, hello, little fella, hello, you know, and you just hold him in your hand, and then you go, oh, you're just such a joy, you're so cute, you know, who's got your belly button, you know, and you're just kind of, they're just springing up like new grass, but by evening, it's withered, the grass is withered. What does that mean? Well, our lives, in whole time perspective, is a vapor. Moses knows, he's saying, and from God's perspective, it's like a day. In the evening, your vapor is dry and withered, then gone. Does this make anybody just feel great and powerful? How great, how big a boy are you? You know? Verses 7 through 10. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. We have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath, and we finish our years with a moan. The length of our days is 70 years or 80 if we have the strength. Yet their span is but trouble and sorrow, and quickly pass, and we fly away. Anyone sing the song, I'll Fly Away? I'll fly away, oh Lordy, I'll fly away. I'll fly away. You know, it's the truth. We're going to fly away. We're going to leave this planet. We're going to leave this earth. And in the meantime, it says, and your life here is just a bunch of toil and trouble. And you finish your life with a moan. And the span of it is trouble and sorrow. And the actual good news towards the end of that is, but it'll quickly pass. You may want to read the book of Numbers to really fully understand the scripture here, what it's saying. But in Numbers, the people's complaints were heard around the clock. We got manna bread. Now we got manna fruit. Now we got more manna peanuts. We got manna everything. And manna coming out our ears, God. This is terrible. Where's the variety of food? And God is providing supernaturally manna from heaven for taking care of all their needs. You know, and it's a beggar asking for toast, kind of this idea here, and they're just like, oh, and they're complaining and whining. And then they're complaining about Moses. Hey, who put you in charge? Why are you in charge of us anyways? We got bad leadership. He always thinks he's the head honcho. He's the top dog. Who put this guy in charge? Maybe you've worked for an organization or have a boss you don't like. And God's put Moses in charge and people complain against him. God says, I got this land for you. Oh, we can't have that land. Look, our people are too big there. They're going to kill us. They'll rip us apart. We look like ants to them. So you can see what this verse is talking about, how the God's anger and indignation burned against them. And then if you're not convinced about secret sins, how the eyes of the Lord are everywhere. He just sees that we're exposed to him in the light of his ways, in the light of his goodness. You just turn over to Joshua and you can see how Achan's family fared in the idea of secret sins. Achan was a man that stole some goods from the band stuff from the plunder of a battle that they had won. And it was supposed to be dedicated to the Lord. The Lord said, dedicate this battle, and all the plunder and everything comes out to the Lord. But Achan and his family stole some idols and things. That they stole some silver and some goods in there. And God didn't let them have any more victories in battle. And so they said, what's going on here? That we were walking in your favor, Lord. And God says, put all the Israelites out in front of me. And then God, one by one, chose the tribe. Then he chose the family, the clan. Then he got down to the individual family. Then it got to the individual person. So step forward, and it's Achan. He's like, I've been exposed. And then what happens is the ground opens up and swallows up this family. I'm like, wow, that doesn't happen every day. God is saying he is powerful in his anger and indignation for sin. He can't stand sin. And then there's troubles with life. If that isn't, bad enough or harsh enough there, we finish with a moan. Our lives filled with trouble and sorrow, but pass quickly. What does it mean to just finish with a moan? And I keep on, people, a lot of times older people tell me about their arthritis or heart defects that they're dealing with and are being run in the hospital. They'll have to go in for checks. My grandma used to say she was dizzy all the time. Grandma's dizzy because she's older, And I said, Grandma, I don't know what we can be done for you here. And she'd complain about those things. And my heart always wasn't all that empathetic. But as you get older, and you wake up in the morning and your ankles sort of hurt or creak, or you start to kind of moan a little bit, you start to get a little more understanding of, wow, this is not going to be any fun when it's me. You finish life with a moan, and the rest of your life is just filled with pain and sorrow. I mean, how many of us know someone that has cancer? How many of us know someone that's had a tumor, had a special operation or procedure? How many of us just know people that are just hurting? And I just think, pretty much the world, and the older you get, the more you hear about, because the more people you know that are getting older with you, and their lives are filled with pain and sorrow, and you're just like, oh man, this shouldn't be called planet Earth. It should have been called planet pain. Well, I try and encourage Christians. This is how I encourage Christians with this comment that I believe is insightful, considering these verses. I encourage Christians in life by telling them that their lifespan on earth, it's going to go quickly, and they're the closest to hell that they'll ever come. But for the non-believer, this time will be the closest they ever got to heaven. Life is here, it's tough, and God said it would be, but it's short. It gives us a little clue as what we should be doing as believers in Jesus Christ, those who have been redeemed, those who have abundant eternal life, what we should be doing with our short time here. Let's pointing others to Jesus, they may also know the hope that we have, because it's a life short, it's a life filled with pain, trouble, moaning. And it goes right from here into a couple big statements that we're going to gather a couple truths out of. A couple big statements about to be made regarding how all this relates to our schedules and margin and breathing time for today. I see, Pastor, there's a lot of good verses here and things, but how does this relate to me right now? Why is this important for me to know right now? Well, verse 11 is a good clue here. It says, who knows about the power of your anger? Moses is saying, who knows about the power of your anger? Who knows how powerful you really are? And Moses has an idea. For your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. He's saying, you are powerful. And the fear that is due you, the reverence that is due you, is equal to how powerful you are. Moses has a great understanding here. Translation here. Point number one. If we could see God as He is, we would be more careful with the time we've been allotted. If we had just a glimpse of how great God is, because we know, what happens to us is we see life within the context of our life. That's all we say we've got to go on. Hey, my life, I think about the hours a day. I think in frames of weeks or days or months or years in the context of my life. And Moses saying, no. Look at your life in the context from everlasting to everlasting. And see how your life fits into that. And this will affect how you choose to live your lives and how we spend the time allotted to us. If you see the whole big picture, if you see the ways that God looks down and sees time and sees humanity as He steps out of space and time, how He sees those things. And the next verse just follows this lead. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us. Why teach us? Why? Because it doesn't come naturally to number our days. It doesn't come naturally to us. What does it mean to teach us? What does it number our days? Number our days means to not take anything for granted. To plan out each day, to be aware of it, to be cognizant of it, to think about it, to reflect about it, to think how each day is being used. We do this, if any of you have been a bride in the room, you've done this. You've numbered your days. Leading 2 months or so out to the wedding day, you're writing down on this day, you need to call the receptionist and make sure the bakery set to bake the cake. And this day, I need to go try on a wedding dress. And on this day, we need to send out invitations, because this is the etiquette way. You send out invitations on this day. And this day, you go to the flower shop and make sure flowers are ordered. And you're just counting down the days until wedding day comes. And if you're in college students and you've got a final exam coming, you plan out your days leading up to that final exam, and you'll plan out different study groups that need to happen for you to organize yourself in such a way that you know the information when that day comes. See, often what we do is we live our lives like we're going to be around forever. And that's where the clutter comes from. We clutter our lives. Like last week, we kind of had to envision 2 closets. One closet is just a mess, and one closet where everything's organized, it's got its place, or 2 different offices. One office where a person just cleaned it and has to clean it before they even work in it. Another office is just things thrown everywhere. And I said, it's not so bad just how we manage space sometimes, but it's bad when our lives begin to look like this cluttered life. It's been just overstimulated and distracted from that which is most important. The priorities are completely thrown out the way because it's so disorganized and without purpose. And had you kind of just envision that. So teach us to number our days and don't act as if we can live forever. What we fall into, Kelly and I, we'll take walks in the evening around the parks and drive our kids around or on their bikes or in a stroller and with Megan. And a lot of times we live our lives, though, as if we're always going to be there for each other. Like we're always going to be around. We don't even think of the possibility that one of us may not be there. We just live our lives. We live our lives with the idea that our kids are always going to be around. We don't know anything different for this time. There's a time in our lives, so they seem like we were kind of, cognizant of the fact that they're growing up fast, and we just kind of, wow, we will spend time way over here, or extra time at work, or extra time doing this, and not always be aware, counting the days of how fast they're growing up. Allie today turns 10. And because our lives weren't busy enough, we had a slumber party on Friday night, and a bunch of girls at our house, and played a bunch of games, and it just had a great time together and stuff. But while Allie was sitting there on the couch next to me, I was looking at her and I said, Allie, you're 10 this weekend. That's a milestone. And I said, you know what? In 10 years, you'll be 20, probably somewhere in college somewhere. And Kelly was listening to me across the room, and she said, Alan, don't say things like that. So I was like, it's true? Time's going to go by that. Kids in a decade, they won't even be in our house anymore. They'll be off to college, be off doing something else. But we live oftentimes like they're going to be around forever. The clutter and other things we put in our lives, we're not focusing on our kids as much as we could. And we live as if many times like our parents are going to be around forever. We could call mom or dad more. We could spend a little bit more time on the weekends with mom and dad and your mom and dad. We could do a little bit more because they're not going to be around forever. And those little idiosyncrasies and things about them that we'll be able to remember and laugh, but we're not going to be able to just give them a call and them just come over or visit with them or talk about life or ask them questions about how they would live or what decision they would make in this case. The things I love about my dad, he told me about it, or made the mistake of telling me about it. I've been telling everybody else about it since, but Mom's been gone in Denver this last week. She gets home today, and Dad told me he's been sleeping on a sleeping bag on his bed because he didn't want to make the bed, or he wants everything clean and immaculate for when Mom returns. And I said, Dad, that's crazy. Like, one person to bed, how quick could you make it each day, or not make it for the week and make it the last day? I don't know, it's just easier this way. But when he's gone, I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss the things that make my dad. And you are too, and we're going to miss those things. And so to not act like we're going to live forever, to not fill our lives with so much other stuff that is taking away that which we talked about is more important. Not doing so much in life that you miss that which matters most. What I'm talking about here. We touched on that last week. And so the second part of this verse, I think we have most to gain here. So that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days. Teach us, Lord, because we don't do it naturally, to number our days. Why? So that we may gain a heart of wisdom. A heart of wisdom, that which will act as the governor or the gatekeeper that we allow in our lives, that will help us know what we need to get rid of from our schedule that's not all that important, that's cluttering our lives. That's just that extra good thing, but we've already got a number of good things we're already trying to do. Or if it's a bad thing, it completely needs to just be cut off. Because we're limited, because our time is not forever. So how then shall we live? Well, here's the point two, the truth number two, and it's a good summary of all these verses. Remembering our time is limited provides us with the wisdom to know how to spend our limited time. Remembering our time is limited provides us with the wisdom to know how to spend our limited time. Like we seem to be, my time is limited, so I need to limit how I spend my time. Seems easy for us to know that truth with money. Hey, when it's gone, it's gone. But when it comes to time, sometimes it's harder to compute with us as much. It's a little more intangible. It's a little harder to see how it's just, when it's gone, it's gone. What should I spend my limited time on? What if I were able to gain some wisdom or insights from people that have been there for most of their life and were able to give insights to me looking back on how they spent their lives or how they would spend their lives if they had to do it again, and how they'd live differently if they had one more time. But luckily today I found some illustrations on this. Bronnie Ware W-A-R-E, hospice nurse in Australia. And she began to ask questions of people that were dying. In fact, she works with people that have under 12 weeks of life left. And she began to ask them questions about their life and what regrets they had. And she, after years and years of doing this, she had thousands of people that shared with her these regrets. And so she started writing a book. She wrote down memoirs first, then began to write a book about this. And here's the 2 top regrets she wrote down from thousands and thousands of hospice patients on the verge of being at the end of their life. Here's number 2, the regret number 2. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. You know, this is not about having a good work ethic or not. This is what she found in her notes, and when she's writing this down, is this is people that felt like they missed much of their children's youth growing up, or they missed some of their time they wish they had back for spouses' companionship and lost time together. She said in her notes, amongst men, there wasn't a single man who didn't mention this statement. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Regret number 1. Maybe you would have thought that regret number 2 would have been number 1. Here's regret number 1. All these thousands of people at the end of their lives. I wished I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. Who you living for? Living for a parent that's gone, living for friends' expectations, bosses' expectations. Who are you living for? That's insightful. And so she writes down, Bronnie says this word for word in a quote. She says, people, when they're in their last few days, would think about unfulfilled dreams, undone ambitions that would now have to be left on the table, knowing that while they died, that it was their own choice not to fulfill these dreams. And then she makes this key sentence here. Health brings a freedom very few realize until they no longer have it. It's like, there we go. We just fast forwarded ahead to give you the opportunity to see why it's so important to number your days. Now, what are you going to do with that? You've seen the future. You've seen why it's so important to have margin in your life. The days are going by fast. Time stops for no man. What are you going to do to give yourself that special breathing room, that margin to really prioritize and spend your life away from all the clutter, to maximize your energy and your time and your love to that which is most important? And here's the pushback that I know and hear. Alan, if I don't work as much as I can and do as much as I can right now, I won't make it. And I would say you better be sure what it is. What is it? When you say I won't make it, what is it? Because you're cluttering your life or chasing after it at the expense of a lot of real valuable things, you better at least define what it is. Many high-powered people and people that spend a whole lifetime pursuing things and spending every minute at work and doing all kinds of things and watching after their money and trading in their peace for prosperity, they get to the end of their life climbing the ladder and they realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. I thought this was it, but it wasn't. Now my life's gone. I can't get any of it back. A second kind of pushback is, Alan, if I don't work all I can and work as much as I can and do as much as I can, I will fall behind. I won't be accepted, or I won't measure up. I say, fall behind who? Who are you falling behind from? Who are the people in your mind? Your mind's going somewhere when you say those things. You got someone in your mind that you're falling behind, and are they people you even really know or care about? I'm not going to measure up. Measure up to who? A dead parent that's long gone, that just always had high expectation of you, and where their hopes and dreams are trying to live through you, and you're still trying to live up to those things. Falling behind who? Accepted by who? That you're willing to just drive some crazy schedule, drive all your time, use up your life with someone else's expectations, someone else's hopes and dreams, so where you're going to look back and regret, why didn't I do this? I always wanted to really do that. But I was pleasing everybody else. Making a lot of money for a company, and young people, teenagers, college students, high school students. In 10 years, all the people you're trying to be accepted by, you won't even know them anymore. You won't have your cell phone number. You won't even have the same phone. We work so hard to impress and be accepted and don't fall behind, and we don't even know who it is we're trying to impress, be accepted by. Some will be real honest. They'll just say, Alan, okay, I work hard. I work as much as I can because I have just never wanted to be poor. I don't want to be poor. What's poor to you? Is poor like poor here in the United States? Are we comparing ourselves to the rest of the world? Because you aren't poor. Are you comparing yourself to the top 5% of wage earners in the United States? Who are you comparing to? Have you defined that? We may be trying not to fall behind and trying to measure up and trying not to be poor, working and living without any margin in our life, and we haven't even defined what we're really doing it for. We haven't defined what we're really trying to avoid. We haven't been trying to define why we're on this treadmill. It's not allowing any margin or breathing room in our lives. I think what it's doing to our schedules and what it's doing to our souls is because there's something in us that says, I don't want to live this way anymore. But isn't it this way with everybody? Isn't everybody doing this? Isn't everyone feeling the same thing? It's just, to be an American, you almost have to be over busy and over committed and have your life falling apart in different areas because you have no margin in it. Isn't that? So Moses would say there's something different. And he would say, when you start counting your days, with that, you can be given a heart of wisdom. When you begin to count your days, when you begin to weigh what you're doing with your time, he gives you a heart of wisdom. And with that wisdom, you'll be able to do what we're going to talk about in the invitation time right now. You're going to be able to think through your life right now. What are some things you need to add to your life? Plus sign. What are things you need to add because they should be a priority? For whatever reason, they've got pushed to the side and your closet's cluttered and it's just shoved these things that should be priorities, should be in the middle of your heart, off to the side. And whether that's kids at home because you're working so hard, or whether that's a spouse that just needs some of your time, or whether that's maybe it's some of your work that needs more time, but you're at a hobby all the time and you're close to losing your job. Whatever needs to be on that list, God's going to, I hope, put his finger on that in your heart. Say, man, you've got to add this to your schedule. This is a priority. All this other stuff is shoving this out. Secondly, you need to think what you need to subtract from your life. What is it as you look at your life and you know you can do 20 great things, but there's 50 great things on your plate. What are those things you need to minus off your schedule? And some, it might be the name of some people. There might be some initials of some people, especially young people or older people. There might be some people that just are taking away from your life. People that are seriously draining you or bringing you down either morally or ethically. What is it you need to subtract? What is it you need to add? You've only got so much time, space. You're limited. You're finite. Finite beings. You're here for a short season, and then you're gone. you're made to have breathing room in order for you to really flourish in the Lord. Jesus early in the mornings would get away to spend time with his Father. I hope this morning you're thinking about in the context of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and who he is to us, and how he loved us, how he died on a cross for our sins and resurrected to give us newness of life. I hope in context we're thinking, okay, why am I here? If I wrote a personal mission statement, I hope it includes something like this that's for me. Lord, I want to glorify you with my life because I love you, because you first loved me and you died for me on the cross and forgave me my sins. And secondly, I want to point others to the same truth, the same relationship. And that's what my life's about. Now I need to look at my schedule. Does my schedule reflect what I say is important? Because I'm limited, I'm only able to spend my life doing so many things. Does my life, schedule, and time reflect what I say is most important to you? And you'll need to do that and reflect in your own lives. Is that true of me? We're going to sing some songs this morning here and praise and worship our Lord, the God of time, the God of margin, the God that gave us a day off, or his people a day off, and breathed in us that you need rest. You need things like joy and peace, and things that are more important than just work. Would you stand with us and sing these songs? If you'd like to talk about the message today, or questions you may have, or about baptism, or coming to know this Jesus as your Lord and personal Savior, and the most important part of time that you could use time would be to ask Jesus into your life. I'm going to be in the back in the connection room, down the hall to the right, and I'd love to speak with you. But this time, let's lift up your voices and magnify and worship the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings.